Hi guys, it's Adam and welcome to another video. So in today's video I just wanted to discuss this idea of individuality and idiosyncrasy and being able to be an authentic, differentiated person. And what I mean by that, of course, coming into this conception of Jung's individuation, of course, coming into the humanist conception, self-actualization, things like that. But I want to touch upon some of the different kind of mistakes around this, because it seems to me, in my own experience, that you can't gain any sense of true individuality. Now, that's quite a bold statement to make, considering that I've read Jung and I've read Nietzsche and I've read various different people who talk about kind of the strength of your own will, the individuality of your own self, becoming who you are, all that sort of stuff. But if you look at yourself, really observe what goes on inside your own psyche, then you'll know that all of your behavior is a formulation of various different images in the psyche which aren't pertaining to who you are, but just rather an image that has been generated in your mind, of course, because of an external stimulus. And I'm not saying this in a behavioural context per se, although you could define it in a behavioural context. But more so, let me give you an example, and I've provided this example before, but it's pertinent to unravel these kind of ideas and understand how individuality flowers, or some sort of individuality, shall we say, flowers from the backdrop or the basis of non-individuality or images that are outside yourself. So imagine you're a young person and you're interested in music, for example, and you're listening at a young age to all these great bands and these great musicians. For example, one person, David Bowie, you might listen to him loads when you were a kid, and his image is in your psyche. Whenever you're thinking, aspiring towards music, and you grab, I don't know, a guitar or something like that, and you're practicing it, and you're having his image in mind as an aspiration. And you won't always get this consciously. It won't always be a very prominent conscious experience, although there are those times in life where we do feel that, and that's the point in which the image of the psyche, in that context of David Bowie, translates into consciousness as a kind of full admiration and full kind of hero respect, not quite hero worship, but hero respect of that particular person. And obviously, going forward, what I'm explaining here is the atonement through many, many, many years of experience and intellectual development of in that specific field, of realizing that person wasn't really anyone particularly great, but that you've now become that person, but in your own individuality, shall we say. But it's the image, it's the following of the image unconsciously that kind of sculpts your own process of individuation towards your particular definitive kind of experience. Now, we must get past these images, because you see, these images And I'll give you another example. Well, let me just kind of flesh out that example a little bit more, and then I'll give you another example. So, obviously you're young, maybe you're 15 at this point or so, you're 16, and you're in this band, and you see this so much with kids as well. They always kind of, they have posters up on the wall, and they aspire to be like this particular artist, and they've got that person in their mind all the time, and they dress up as them and all the rest of it. They go the full shebang. And that continues throughout their development, and they always say in interviews, oh, well, it was this person who inspired me and I thought they were so great and all this. And it's a slow realization over a number of years. And as I say, during this experiential development and also potentially this intellectual development of starting to get to grips and know and experience what that person you were worshipping experienced, doing all the gigs, having all the failures, learning all the new instruments, learning all the songs off by heart and all that sort of stuff. Not just their songs, but I mean your songs as well, doing that process. And then finally realizing, hang on, I'm an individuality in my own right now. Now this work, I can tell you how this worked in poetry, because I've done poetry for 3 years now. And of course, one of the main inspirers of mine was Dr. Seuss. But aside from that, because he's been more the passive image in my psyche, shall we say, as an inspirer. But aside from that, really the big one for me is Nietzsche and his aphorisms and his poetic style, and everything like that has bled into a lot of my poetry. And you'll find when that image, the Taoists would call it like a spirit, kind of like a spirit of a dead master that comes in your mind and can direct your behaviour. This is what's talked about, as I've mentioned before, in The Secret of the Golden Flower. But you become kind of, that image becomes prominent in your psyche through all of your work. And then that image, which is itself an archetypal experience, pushes through you and creates and colorizes your work. And this seems to me to be a mental parallel of ecological changeability. I'll explain that, and you will know fully what I mean, and you'll be like, oh my god, of course it's that. So, well, you might be, or you might disagree. If you disagree with me, that's bloody brilliant, because it means that I can actually understand my own ideas more, because every time someone disagrees with me, I get somewhere higher. I go higher. I get more knowledge. It's incredible, and you get this sense of I don't know, feeding on something rich, like you're eating a big meaty steak. Because it's the fact of that disagreement that makes you, yes, okay, it's horrible and it can be challenging because your ideas are negated and things that you've worked on for so long are completely redundant or whatever. But you gain, if you look and if you can pierce through, you can gain real richness out of that. But imagine on the planet, right, we all know this, very, very basic ecology. When one thing dies, it turns into something else. It goes back into the environment, and, the energy from that particular creature, that particular dead body, has gone into the soil and, cultivated some crops, or gone to create more bountiful crops or whatever, because of the energy of that body dispersing into the soil and fertilizing the soil more, whatever. It goes into all different, like the water from that body gets dispelled, etc. And it rejuvenates a planet. Very, very basic ecology, because that's how the planet keeps going. There's no way it can not take on the resources from its past to use it for its future. Otherwise, life wouldn't be able to continue because it would stagnate. The resources would just dry up. So that's how life has been able to continue over billions and billions of years. So what this seems to be, this kind of, these spirits that I'm talking about, imagine that image of Nietzsche pushes through me and colorizes my work. It seems to be, it's not synonymous, I would say, it's more analogous to that physical rejuvenation. This is on the mental level. This is the mental level of rejuvenation, and it's that kind of that dead person is a residual of kind of psychic a psychic process or a psychic function or a psychic residue, shall we say, that then actually comes through the living person, the next living person, and rejuvenates into something new. And this is the process of individuation, where the image, at first, you will look up to all these inspirers or whatever, or you'll have these images in your mind. It doesn't really matter, to tell you the truth, whether you look up to inspirers or not. These images are in your psyche, and they will affect you and bring you towards your individuation. It need not matter whether you consciously, have a real, genuine aspiration or projection onto a particular person from the past or from, one of your contemporaries or anything like that. It just happens anyway, unconsciously. But so what happens is, with my poetry, for example, I started off and it was very like Dr. Seuss. And of course, when I was writing that poetry, the image of Dr. Seuss comes in my mind as I'm writing it. And that image, because there is a whole archetypal theme or an archetypal pattern related to Dr. Seuss and his individuation, then that actually comes through me into my poetry, and suddenly I'm Dr. Seuss. I'm a rejuvenated, but I'm literally playing out that individualized archetype within his particular timeline. Within my timeline, but as a kind of sort of hollow version of his own timeline, if you will, or his own life. So then what happens is, you'll flick between these different modes, and then of course what I did was I wrote poetry and I was writing it, and it was very creative and all the rest of it, very really in it, and it was very Nietzschean, and then it was very like Charles Bukowski, and at one time it was like William Wordsworth, and at another time it was like William Blake, and all these different, and all these images of these people, because I was aware that it's like their poetry, came in my mind while I was writing the poetry, of course. I mean, you have to gain a very, very high level of consciousness to be able to see this while it's happening. It takes you about 2 years of psychological development every day to be able to understand just this, to get to this level. So I am explaining quite highbrow Jungian concepts here. But nonetheless, that happens, and then you write like that. But then what slowly happens over the course of your intellectual development is that these things unify. They coagulate, if you want to use alchemical terminology, or they congeal in a sense. And then you get more of an expression of your own individuality, which was there from the beginning, held within your genetics, the individualized version of instincts that you have. It was always there, but you kind of get to the process of individuation through back and forth until you hit that point. And then what happens is you write with a sense of your own image being in your psyche. And that's a bit of a hard conception to get yourself around, because it's like, well, hang on a minute, it sort of defies logic in a way that you're dictated by yourself in your own psyche, in the sense that you have an image of what yourself is exactly like. and then that flows through you into your poetry or into your work, and that becomes more of the defining factor. But that itself is based on a coagulation of various different things that have kind of fleshed out your own archetype, your own archetypal experience, by way of all the other people in the past that had a similar archetypal experience to you, and their instincts and their genetic makeup and their neurological structure was similar to yours, and so you kind of pulled them in unconsciously and then formulated your own individuation from it. Now, obviously, to someone not really trained or understanding of Jungian psychology in any depth, they'll be kind of baffled by my words, because I've just said, doesn't it defy logic that you can be dictated by your own image in your psyche? Well, the normal individual, normal person, everyday person, would say, well, I'm always dictated by myself in my own, in my own mind. I'm always me. I always direct my own behavior. I always am that. That's the furthest from the truth that you could ever imagine. Whether we're talking about it from a behavioral context, these things, stimuli kind of impinging on you, and you being this kind of deterministic agent in which you're going about things because of antecedent causes and all that sort of stuff, or whether we're talking about in this kind of more mental strata of existence, of the kind of the images of the psyche, the quasi-archetypal images of the psyche, if you will, or the individualized archetypal images of the psyche that are coming through you and directing your spirit in that way. And that is also, as I've said, that can also fit quite neatly within a behavioral context if you wanted to explain it via behaviorism, because of course that is environmental to a good degree as well. But from a Jungian viewpoint, that would be the fleshing out of the archetype. So the archetypal form would be that has like a form that is a general form, but that isn't fleshed out in any sort of way. It's kind of like, so it's not nothing, but it's not something. It's kind of just a general form. Then it's fleshed out. So that would, and that fleshing out would be the images that you have in your psyche of previous people who have gone before you and had a certain instinctive arrangement that have led them to a certain individuation, and then that kind of resets within you in a sense, or gets placed within you, and then formulates, as I say, your own individuation. But this is the weirdest thing, isn't it? Coming back to this idea of where's the time? 18 minutes. That's not too bad. It's the weirdest thing, explaining this kind of idea of not being an individual, not having full individuality, because so many people talk about living within your own words. So many philosophers talk, there's an abundance of philosophers and various different people who say, live within yourself, state what you think, don't state what other people think. Don't be dictated by the words of another. Say as you will say, as coming deep from your inner truth. But it's not particularly like that. Yes, from an instinctive perspective, we can always make the argument, well, on a kind of superficial level, we could say that's what you're always doing. You're always living in your own truth because you're always living in the instincts. There's always an instinctive tendency pushing up through you. For example, it was an instinctive tendency of mine within the spirit to record this video, and you can see within the intellectual instinct, my spirit is pulling me forth right now, and I'm living in an instinctive truth of some degree, and so you could say that, and you could say, well, you're always living in your instinctive truth. But of course, even then, I've got images in my mind right now in this video that are dictating me, and I can't ever be fully 100% certain what is my truth and what I'm saying because of an image of a person from the past in my psyche, just subtly changing my words because I want it to sound in this way or that way. And when I say I don't particularly fully mean me as a fully conscious person of that, but I also mean my subconscious, or within the self itself as well, the totality of my personality and how that's playing within me. And so you can't say that fully, you can't categorize that fully. And it's a great achievement, I feel, for someone to be able to recognize that. If you can recognize that, then you can realize that you whatever you say isn't yours. It isn't just your truth. It isn't, completely. You can't lay claim to it fully. And there is a brilliant old saying as well for this: there's nothing new under the sun. And this comes into this whole video can be summarized in that one phrase: there is nothing new under the sun. So we could say that's the case, but you never know when it's fully genuine, when it's kind of really pushing up through you. We can't understand as well when someone gets to individuation how the level of which that's genuine, into not the individuation per se, but the ability to not be affected by the images of the psyche and what is truly yours. We can't understand that either. We can't say, well, you've laid claim to that. Now, there's many ideas in alchemy, of course, which I've touched upon before: the creation of the subtle body, the return to the heavenly heart in Chinese alchemy, also in Chinese alchemy, the attainment of the golden flower, and the ability to become a kind of like a spirit after death, which is a whole person contained in a personality that is strong, unwavering, unmoved, and is individual. And this comes into that as well, because it's to the degree that you can congeal and coagulate. It's called in the process of really it's the peacock's cry, and it's the process in alchemy where you go through the melting and mixing. And the melting and mixing really is the psyche splits off into various instinctive tendencies. And so instead of you just being you anymore in the point of alchemy of the peacock stage, which I believe is between Negredo and Albedo, but I'm not 100% certain. I think it's between those two. It might be between Albedo and Libido, but it's in there anyway. It's kind of the middle. It's in the middle, maybe just towards the latter. And this is where the psyche will split into various different instinctive tendencies, and then you have to understand all of those instinctive tendencies within you, both feminine tendencies and masculine tendencies, and then melt and mix them together, and then formulate over that time period a whole unit, a whole sense of self, which then this latter part of this process is the anima. When we get to this latter part, and the flicking back and forth very, very quickly between the kind of the anima moods, the kind of the images within your psyche of the anima that control you and dictate you. They're going to become more and more fast, and they're going to be more and more volatile. And then you get to the white tinctor, which is the white queen, and that is the anima, that's attainment of the anima, and that is relating to the white stone as well, the elixir that cures all ills but doesn't make you immortal. Then, when you get to the red tincture, then you get the lapis philosophiarum, the red powder, sometimes, of course, the red stone, but it's more of a powder, and then that will make you immortal. And that immortality is an analogue for a psychic mental residue or remnant of your own personality as manifest in a whole contained idea and unit, the idea being a vessel for your continued propagation in humanity over the next generations. And that kind of gives you a psychic reality after death. Now, you're not living, it's not that you're alive, but you have a psychic reality after death. I've touched upon this before. In the Egyptian conception of the soul, it's the unification of K and Bay. K is like vital essence, and Bay is like this another part of the soul. I forget actually, but it's like kind of more of the soul. It's like the animus and the anima, really. That's in the Egyptian conception. But these two principles, they unify after death in this process, and then you become a living, and I am getting the pronunciation of some of these things wrong because I'm terrible at that, but you become a living ak. It's a A-K-H, and that living ak is the exact same thing as the Taoist conception of the immortal spirit after death that comes into the psyche and can actually change the behaviour of the living, and the living ak can do that as well in the Egyptian conception of the soul. And the way in which this can be explained scientifically is that basically if you overcome all your fears and you reduce the cortisol in your body and you aren't affected externally by all of these different things in the world, then that reduction, as I've said, can make you more of a whole unit and make you have a stronger spirit as well, because you've overcome all these fears and you've had to be tough and you've had to direct your spirit, all these things, and then you get over the fetters of the anima, like in The Secret of the Golden Flower, as I've talked about, and then what happens is you become closer and closer, and again, this had to come in with the interpretation of dreams and all the rest of it as well, and it's a very, very conscious process, this. And then what happens is you can formulate a one strata of personality. There's like a through line in your personality that is like the subtle body. That's like the subtle body in alchemy, and then it's that particular idea within, as a substrata within your personality, that is placed there as kind of like a subtle body that goes on and propagates itself and resides within the minds of men to come. And scientifically, what this is that if you can formulate a whole sense of self and a sense of oneness within you that isn't comparable to the normal everyday person, which is a stronger sense of oneness that isn't affected by the archetypes, then everyone around you has a certain cemented idea of you in their psyche that is quite similar as a personality, as a basis for your personality. And then that idea has a reality within the hippocampus, within the amygdala, within all these different brain structures, or can have a reality within all these different brain structures as an idea of you that is cemented even after your death in those psyches. Now, then what happens from that idea is that when someone dreams, and all sorts of brain areas are firing and all the rest of it, they may have a dream of you, and they will dream of you as being a representative of that very, very one-like idea, that very, very whole idea of who you were, because you are that one whole personality. You cultivated that enough in your lifetime. Then you'll get dreams of that person after death where they come back and they'll be a guiding figure for you, most likely, in your dreams. And they will be it'll be a numinous experience, because when you dream of that person, you'll think, it was almost as if that was that person coming to me in my dream. And in fact, it was a kind of mental remnant of that person that is a kind of an idiosyncratic psychic process within the collective unconscious that cemented itself there. It's a quasi-archetypal form. The individual starts to become a representation of an archetype, hence they are kind of like a quasi-archetype themselves, or an idiosyncratic archetype. And so the more famous an individual gets in their lifetime for a specific career, and for a specific and also for a specific wholeness of personality, then the more they propagate themselves, like as I've talked about before in memetics, they propagate themselves in the brains of a larger collective, and then they can cement themselves for longer to come if that individual is aligned with that archetypal experience so much that it can propagate itself. Because if that individual isn't aligned with a particular archetypal experience, the archetype won't activate for that particular individual, and so therefore they're more likely, that remnant is more likely to decay in the unconscious over a number of years after their death, and then they're gone. But it can sustain itself for generations upon generations. People like this are philosophers like Socrates. They are literally these people who are still living in the unconscious now. When I was doing research on this, and when I was this was a few months ago, and when I was really getting deep into this, I started to, I made up my own term for this. I call this a resting potential person, because that alludes to the action potentials in the brain. So when a neuron isn't firing, you say it has a resting potential. When it is firing, there's an action potential there. There's an action, something fires. And but there is still a low level of voltage that is still there, even in a resting potential, even in that position. And that is like these mental remnants in the unconscious. They are resting potential people. That means to say that they've gone back into the realm of ideas of the unconscious, and they are resting potential, ready to impact the living when that experience comes forth, but nonetheless they are there as a resting potential in the unconscious. And those are people like Socrates, like Lao Tzu, even to a degree modern people like Nietzsche, like Jung. These people are all resting potential people. But you see, the level of which you can become a resting potential person depends, for one, on your devotion to life, on how much you're going to get over your fears, and you're going to align with a specific individuality over and above the images that I've just talked about earlier on in this video that will possess you and will change or kind of will sculpt your individuality, but maybe in too much of a way of their own individuality, you see. Because that can be another variation of individuation where you don't get full individuation, but you get a kind of like a parody of individuation where it's a bit too much like someone else's. And that's a wrong turn, that is. You have to make sure that you're watching these images and make sure that you can get full your individuation, who you are. So if you watch those images, and if you can overcome those images, and if you can coagulate those images and congeal those images into a formulation of yourself, your individuality, that is a formulation of the remnants that went before you, just like, for example, your body is a formulation of your parents' genetics and all this sort of stuff, and all sorts of different chemicals, and then their parents, etc., etc. Just as it is that way, so the psyche works. So that's how the psyche works in terms of getting you to your own kind of whole sense of self. The body is formulated from, of course, all different varieties of different things, not only just from all different organs here that make a whole, that go to make your whole, but also from all these experiences that have gone before you to lead your mum and dad up to, obviously, having sex, then getting pregnant, and then all sorts of chemical reactions coming together, going apart, all that sort of stuff, and then creating a birth, and then there you go. There's your one thing created from all those different elements. And the complexities of that, causally speaking, they're so small, so fine that you can never determine it. But nonetheless, that's it. And it's the same for your psychic development, because the causal complexities and the finite kind of structure of what makes a whole individuality over the lifespan is so fine, you can never understand it. You can only talk about it in some degree of complexity, not complete degree of complexity, by way of our imperfect nature. I can never know the entirety of what is going on inside myself, because I am myself. So there's always things that I'm going to be blind to. There's always things that, just like when I look in a mirror, I can only ever see the front of me. And yes, okay, you could make the argument that if I put mirrors all around me, let's say I put 12 mirrors or 10 mirrors all around me in a specific arrangement, I'd probably see a lot more of myself than just looking in that mirror there. And I'd possibly be able to see parts of my back and all the rest of it. But I still wouldn't see everything. There'd always be something that I couldn't see. Bottom of my feet, for example. And even if, let's say, I put my feet up like that to try and see them, then I'm looking at my feet too much and I've lost this part of me. I can't see this part of me or whatever. So you can never see the entirety of yourself, psychologically or physically. And that's just how it is, So the complexity of this is so great that you can never fully understand it. And this gets back to as well, kind of our own this kind of point of this. There is never any full level of your own individuality. There is never any full level of your you being distinct, idiosyncratic, you being someone of your own completely. There isn't that. That doesn't exist. There's nothing new under the sun. You can attain individuation. You can become an individual in some regard, but it will always be dictated on people from the past, on events from the past, on all these different things that have happened. And this is why Jung says a man isn't born once, but he is born into the specific culture and specific sort of time period that is there right then. And that is true, because that birth is a symbol of that exact time period, of that exact temporal spatial moment, and that exact formulation of culture, that exact point in time. And that birth also rests on the entire history before it. If one person had done one thing differently, we could talk about the butterfly effect here. One person did one thing differently, that birth it might not happen. So it's entirely based on that specific arrangement, and it's at that specific moment, and then of course that person grows up and kind of attains a kind of fleshing out of the archetypes that they're born with, the archetypal forms that they're born with, the instinctive forms that they're born with. They attain a fleshing out of that within the social environment, and that dictates their nuances, shall we say, in the sense of, if I was born in the 17th century, I was born in the 17th century. And my archetypal framework, shall we say, or those forms, could have been exactly the same as they are now. Right now, I could be, the structure of my brain could be incredibly similar to someone who was born in I don't know, 1714 or 1657 could be incredibly similar, and they could have an incredibly similar structure to me, but we are not the same person because we are differentiated within a specific culture, a specific spatial temporal moment. We are relativized, if you want to put it in that language, we are relativized by a specific era, and we are relativized in that specific way, and so that person might very well, I could meet them and there could be underlying, as a very basic thing, there could be very, very close connections on a collective level, on a collective instinctive level. We might have the same eccentricity and stuff like that, but it'll be expressed in very different ways that are dependent on our culture, on our time. My eccentricity will be expressed based within the 21st century. That person's eccentricity will be based within all of the nuances that surround the 17th or 18th centuries. The mannerisms, the language, all this sort of stuff. The social framework, the social consensus, the societal norms, everything. And that's the relativization, really. But nonetheless, there is a substrata of very, very piercing similarity between those two people, and that's the collective unconscious. That's the archetype, you see. And really, what we are is we are formulations in a different variety or a different variation of people who have lived and lived and lived before and before and before, and that goes back, of course, to this fundamental idea of the Godhead, and of the kind of the Godhead playing out all these different roles, all these different patternings in humanity, and that idea is, of course, so closely aligned with the archetypes and the self and stuff like that, and you see that in this kind of way of recognizing this collective patterning and these collective representations. And it's not very hard to understand that. That's quite a basic idea, really. It's something that, if you're interested in Jungian psychology, you pick up on in the first few months, of your development. If you're an intellectual person, if you think about 10 hours a day, you do have to think, okay, yeah, it's not crazy, but it's not too easy. But, if you think quite a lot, then you'll pick it up, although saying that, for me, there was a lot of groundwork before I even got into Jungian psychology. I did 12 months of philosophical, intense philosophical inquiry before I even got into Jungian psychology, and we're talking anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day, constant thinking about various different religious ideas and spiritual ideas before Jungian psychology. And then getting into Jungian psychology, you can start to pick apart some of these nuances as well more clearly. But of course, everyone has different causal developments, and so for one person it might take them less time because they've got into a different area at a different time, whereas with my development I had it in a certain formulation. So for someone else it might take less time because they've got in a different area, but it might take them more time to understand something I understood earlier in my development. So it's all different for different people, and that's something that intrigues me quite a lot, the variations on spiritual and intellectual experience that mean that certain people get to the same ideas via different causal currents, not only experientially in terms of, of course, well, you have a life and that's causally arranged, and then, of course, you go somewhere and then you end up looking at a book, and then that book brings you quite a lot of joy or happiness or whatever, and then you go somewhere else and find other books, and then you get on that. I don't just mean that, but I'm meaning more like the specific things that you actually do, like this, what specific books you've read, what specific things, partially that, but partially the literally the specifics of it. and then that has then led people to certain experiences that then has led them to ideas that are the same as that I've got to, but that I've got to them through reading completely different books and having a completely different experience, and but yet we get to the same idea, the same core, and that intrigues me a lot with regards to that causal formulation of different notions and different understanding of different things. And that is very, very interesting. That's very, very cool. And it's very odd for me because I always have this suspicion with people, and this is an This is possibly more of an idiosyncrasy, more of an individual thing than, let's say, something that's been come about or been changed by someone in my past specifically. But this is more of an idiosyncrasy within myself. And what I've always had this suspicion. Whenever I meet anyone who's, or whenever I think about anyone, because I've not really met that many people at all who are really interested in Jungian psychology. I've never met anyone to the degree I'm interested in it. Of course, I've watched people online. I've read many books, watched interviews, all that sort of stuff. But I've never met anyone who's at like that level, And so that's interesting. That would be interesting to meet someone. But I always have this level of suspicion because, or not even suspicion, it's sometimes suspicion, it's sometimes misunderstanding. Where I think, well, have they had the same experiences as I had? Yeah, okay, they're telling me all this stuff. They're speaking to me in language, which, as we know, is horribly, I think Alan Watts said, language is horribly clunky. And I quite like that phrase because it's horribly clunky way of expressing experience. You can never do it just doesn't work. But if someone were to talk about me about all these ideas, then I'd be like, well, how did you get to that? Did you get to it through the way I got to it? And what kind of was the real feeling of your experiences, and what was the depth of your experiences, and how have you categorized this, and where did you, what happened in your environment, what causal kind of arrangement leading up to that happened to get you to that? I suppose it's quite a very scientific attitude in a way, but I never think of it as a scientific attitude. I think of it as quite an exploratory attitude of an experience, of a subjective experience, and in that way it really isn't scientific. But nonetheless, I feel that, and I want to know what these people did and how they got exactly there. Because I would imagine, again, I've never done this for anyone, so I wouldn't know, but I would imagine that it's very different. That even the experiences are very different, because we all think, well, spiritual experiences must be pretty similar for everyone. There must be a collective spiritual experience. Like, for example, the typical experience, Kensho experience in Zen, where your mind, that first Kensho experience, where your mind just explodes and you see everything like with a brightness and a colour, and automatically that everything in the universe is God, or everything in the universe is something unnameable that the religious people have called God, and you know that you are everything, and that, like, piercingly in my experience, not as partially as an intellectual formulation, but not fully. There's something there, like it's just deeper experience, and it is very prominent. And you think, well, everyone who's been interested in Jungian psychology, or everyone who's this or that, must have had that experience, right? Or must have had the exact same experiences as I had. But we can't categorize that. I mean, even if I'm to ask them, even if I say, look, this was the exact experience I had, have you shared that experience? They will say, well, yes, I did. But then, okay, let's say they said, yes, I did. How do I know that it wasn't greater than my experience? How do I know it wasn't lesser as an experience compared to mine? How do I know that it was genuine? How do they know that mine was genuine? How do we know what that means? How can we categorize that? We can't categorize that. All these different things. the things that we can categorize a little bit more is, for example, let's say we have intellectual experiences, and in a sense, a spiritual experience is encapsulated within an intellectual development. That is a truth, that a spiritual experience is encapsulated within that. There is also a deeper sense of emotion and experience tied to that, and we can't negate that, but there is a lot of it that is encapsulated within an intellectual development. And that's, of course, why Jung said, well, it's not really why he said it, but he did say it, that it's that the superior intellect who can think in non-dual terms and can experience that, really fully for what it is. And so there is that to it. But imagine that, let's say, in more of an intellectual capacity, you've got two people, and let's say there's a particular idea or experience of reality that they're getting to. And it might be within a Jungian framework, for example, because that's just what we're talking about. So these two people might read completely separate books, have completely separate experience in terms of, their intellectual understanding of things. But then those two people get to this kind of same understanding of what they can perceive in reality. Now, that's very interesting, because isn't that bloody marvellously interesting? Those two people have read two different books, or let's say they've each read 10 or 20 books, each different, they're all different books, but yet they get to the same experience. That's marvelously interesting, because you kind of think to yourself, well, for one, you can never categorize their experiences fully again. You can do in a sense, because you can say, well, they got to this through their intellectual development this way, and so that was their causal track to it, and that was my causal track to it, and there we go, and that led us to the experience. Fair enough. But you can't understand, relative to you, what their kind of grasp of the experience was, how they experienced it fundamentally. Yes, you may have got to the same experience, but how did they fundamentally grasp it? Because, of course, it's going to be different to you. Even though you've got to the same experience, you've read totally different things to get you there. So you may be able to perceive the same experience of reality. Brilliant, great. And you may even be able, when you're communicating, you may even be able to say, oh yeah, these things that I read are the exact same things as the things that you read, and these things that you read are the exact same that I read, etc. And so I can see the overlap there intellectually that gave us this experience. But nonetheless, the causal track and the emotion behind that causal track to those experiences will have had subtle, mild experiences themselves, which would have differed, which wouldn't have been the same. They would have differed by the fact of the intellectual formulation within the books that generated certain ideas within them and certain experiences within them that then ultimately, after a long time period, got them to that experience. So then you have to concede that actually there are differences either side, even though they got to the same experience, even though they can categorize and understand and realize, these two individuals, that the two intellectual formulations that got them there are the exact same overlapping thing, that are two intellectual formulations describing the exact same experience. Like, for example, behaviorism and Jungian psychology. They both describe the exact same thing in a sense, and of course there's a little bit of disconnect, because of course Jungian psychology, there's a little bit more to it, you would say, but the fact is that there's a lot of concepts in behaviorism that are exactly defining what is true in Jungian psychology, and they are explaining the exact same phenomena. For example, rule-governed behavior in behaviorism is the logos, is the formulation of a rule from the animus, from the spirit. For example, positive reinforcement, positive side of the anima, the positive affect, things like that. These are concepts that are the same in both psychologies, and you can do this for all of psychology. Most of psychology is just explaining the same things, just in needlessly complex ways in various different fields, because, in part, it gratifies the ego of people who formulate new conceptions to formulate those new conceptions, and so new fields and new ideas get generated over time in a superfluous manner that just is like some sort of Nietzschean decadence, which Nietzsche would just hate, because it's like, hang on a minute, you're just a neologist who's coming up with various different ideas that have already been formulated in the past that don't need to be formulated in a new framework or in a new subset of a framework. It's just, you could just go over here to this person's framework and say, we're doing it in this way. You don't need to have all these different frameworks. You could just say, right, we're doing behaviorism. We'll get rid of all other psychology. I would say that's probably a bit of a bad one. I wouldn't choose behaviorism myself, but we could do that. We could say, right, behaviorism, we're doing this. Get rid of all other attempts. Just focus on this one, and explain it in these exact terms. Now, of course, there is a negative from doing that, which is the fact, hang on, that's all your eggs in one basket, and then what if this turns out to be wrong, and da-da-da-da. So, it may not be a good idea, actually, to put it all in that one field, but nonetheless, the levels of complexity going down, like, you've got one level of complexity here, another, at the moment in the 21st century are ridiculously too much. Especially in psychology, like, the complexity is just absolutely, as I say, decadent, superfluous, just horrible, it's unnecessary. You just don't need it all. And like, it's things like in clinical psychology as well that can be, I'll just have to get that buzzer. So, in clinical psychology, there's things like, antisocial behaviour disorder and things like that. And all these things, of course, you always, whenever I'm watching these lectures, I'm always smiling, because I'm like, well, that's just the shadow, and then it's like, well, you explain it in a certain way that's massively complex, that has value from a clinical standpoint. I'm not going to disregard that, but yet we have another thing over here that's explaining it, we have another thing over here that's explaining it, and we have another thing over here that's explaining it. And you see this a lot in like statistics as well with psychology, where you have like independent variable, and you have like 3 different names, or you have dependent variable, and you have 3 different names for what an independent variable could be, or what a dependent variable is. You have 3 different names for the same phenomena. It's just decadence. There's no need for it. It's like the most bizarre, stupid thing ever. And the people who do it are only doing it because they think, I'd like to call it that, and then, but it's just pointless. It's like me. I do it all the time. Do I really need to name resting potential person, like I've just said before? No, it's a neologism to gratify my own ego, because of course I want to be this philosopher who names these concepts, and one day when I'm dead, it'd be good to have a Wikipedia page where it says under my Wikipedia page, notable ideas, resting potential person. It's a load of shit, so and this is what we do in psychology. We overcomplex. And in every field, we overcomplex, and it's just for the point of overcomplexity. And I've talked about this before, and this comes into what's happening in the 21st century, where we're overcomplexifying things to such a degree that we're then needing to create conceptions on conceptions, and we need to create more and more conceptions to kind of label and categorize this shit show of kind of overabundance, overcomplexity, fear, misunderstanding, mentalisms, all that sort of stuff. There's so much that is trying to be kind of like fitted in categorically that doesn't need to be fitted in. It's just decadence. We are literally going towards a sense of nihilism and meaninglessness because of overcomplexity, because of decadence. It's not anything else, and if we you go to a supermarket, right, and imagine, and this is like a commercialistic or commercialism form of decadence or overcomplexity. You go to a supermarket, and let's say years and years ago, you'd go to a supermarket and there'd be a few things on the shelf. There'd be a few cans of soup. Your Campbell's soup, maybe, a few other brands, whatever. There we go. That's that. Brilliant. Great. There we go. Gonna go into the shop. Oh, hi there, John, whatever, the shop manager. You know them by name. You know about their family, all the rest of it. Brilliant. You go in and there's, there you go. There's my Campbell's. Beautiful. I'll grab that. And you might think, you know what? I want to change one day. I'll have that other brand today. Fair enough. Brilliant. That's great. And there might be a few brands on the shelf, so you got a little bit of option there. So it's not that you've not got any option. Then, you feel comfortable. You've picked it up straight away. Not wasted any time, no faffing about, none of that, no kind of negative emotion or anything towards it. Right, go to the shop, go to the thing, say hi to John, have a bit of a chat, brilliant, getting your communication in, great, brilliant. 100 years later, you've got, right, go down Tesco, right, okay, crisps, right, I need some crisps. Wow. Bloody hell, there's a lot of choice here, isn't there? And then you stand there, and you're looking. Crisps, they're quite good. Oh, I had them before. Yeah. Walkers, I like them. Bloody good. McCoys, they look good. Then you stand there for a little bit longer. I don't do this that much, by the way. I just try and grab whatever I'm going to grab because I'm not bloody standing there choosing for half an hour like that. Unless I want to, then I will choose for half an hour. But what happens is then you start getting a bit, I don't know. I've got about 6 options in my mind now, and it's that's quite a bit for me. And now I've got to try and use my executive function to try and process all of this. I think, well, emotionally, what do I want? What do I feel like? And but also, what would it be best for me to have? Maybe based on price, or maybe based on because of course I have a little bit of a budget, so I don't want to be buying something like crazy expensive, you might think, well, there's a bit of fat in here, or there's a bit less fat in this one, or whatever, and so then I'll go for this one because it's got a bit less fat in. But then you still so you stood there for 20 minutes just trying to pick up some bloody crisps because you've got this massive overabundance of choice that is completely superfluous, that's completely decadent. Now, I am all for capitalism. I love capitalism. I think it's good. I don't mind capitalism. I've always, naturally I would say that, being brought up as someone, well, not brought up, but I mean just naturally having a proclivity towards business. I've always loved business from when I was 13. So naturally I would have that attitude, and it is kind of behaviourally entrenched within me. But I like capitalism. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that it becomes bad because, of course, naturally companies, greed, all that sort of stuff, competition is a good element in capitalism actually, but with regards to all these different new companies coming up, and then an overabundance of things and all the rest of it, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it just needs to be restricted down a little bit, and then be able to actually understand that these things in life, these choices that we're making, aren't the necessary they're not the big choices, they're not the things that should matter in any sense, but yet these are the things that are slowly starting to matter. It's the same with things like gender and sexuality, as I've talked about. Gender and sexuality 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it didn't matter. You were what you were, and that's what, of course, naturally, there's things that shouldn't have been in place 200 years ago, like the fact of it being illegal to be gay. That was something that was totally uncalled for, totally shouldn't have happened, or shouldn't have been in place. But, nonetheless, it was, you were what you were, and you knew you had a position of you were what you were, and there wasn't any thinking about it, or any anxiety or neuroticism around it. It was just, that's as you were. And there we go. And naturally, with people who are gay, there was probably a lot of neuroticism there in terms of, well, I can't be gay, and if I'm caught doing this, then, you know, I'm going to get killed or whatever, or something bad's going to happen to me. Yes, of course there was that. But what we've done in the 21st century is we've become completely obsessed with these things, and instead of, let's say, just saying, right, everyone can be what they want to be, fair enough, right? As we are now, you know, in our overt liberalism, in our overabundance of liberalism, that actually comes out as well within our kind of overabundance of choice and overabundance of all these different things that I've talked about, and overabundance in ways of conceptualizing of things and all the rest of it. But imagine if you say, right, everyone can be what, brilliant. So then someone is allowed to be the expression of who they are. Great. But why do you need to think about it so much? There's all these people who have brilliant choice to express gender or sexuality. Great. Be it. But why is everyone expressing it all the time? It's as if people are attached to these ideas so much that they don't need to be. Let's take this back to 1920s, 1910s, whatever, and imagine for a minute, if you will. I know it's an incredibly hard thing to do because it didn't even happen. Imagine, if you will, that those people were given freedom of choice to be anything, right? Then what they would do is you'd get some people saying, well, yeah, I'm pansexual, yeah, I'm this gender, I'm non-binary, or I'm heterosexual, I'm this, whatever, all different variety. But they wouldn't start like just constantly thinking about it as if it's something to be talked about every single day. That's not what sexuality or gender is about. It's about, yes, I'm that, let's move on with my life. And if someone comes up and starts to challenge you on that, then you say, well, actually, I don't think this, and I am this, and then you move on with your life. You don't think about it. You don't talk about it every second of every day. You don't try and overabundantly or over superfluously kind of try and get your opinion over everyone else or onto the world or make a mark, because that's childish. You what you do is you say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and that's that. And that is a part of your life, no doubt, but it's not the only part of your life. You know, for example, with myself, I say I'm a man, and I could be happy having sexual relations with a man or a woman, with anyone really, with someone non-binary, with anyone. It doesn't bother me. It's never really bothered me. And I've always, for a few years now, since I've been comfortable with it, I've categorised myself as bisexual. Now, I do not ever say that. You ask any of my friends, they'll tell you, well, yeah, I kind of know that. You know, he might have mentioned it once, but he never talks about it. I never say, oh, well, that's that. You know, I just don't, because I don't feel as if it's necessary. It's just there in the background. That's what it should be. It should be there in the background. It shouldn't be something that is talked about, expressed every single second of the day. That's childish. That's neurotic. That's an over reliance on one instinct, which is the sexual instinct, or practically the sexual instinct. It's too one-sided on that side of that particular thing. And naturally, I've had my own battles with being too one-sided in a neurotic way on with regards to that variety of experience. And such is different complexes that work in you, but it's a childish element to be one-sided in that way. There's more to life than that. There's creativity, there's being assertive, there's being emotional, there's being logical, there's all these different instincts that come up through you sympathetic, empathetic, all these different things, an abundance of different things that come through you. But it seems that we have in the 21st century an anima investment, a fixation, an anima fixation within those ideas of over complexity, of complete liberalism, of something that we have to have everything to be accepted. Everything that should be accepted must be accepted. But this is the weirdest thing, and I've said this in a poem before, quite a philosophical poem actually. It's more actually a piece of philosophy than it is a poem. But the kind of the ethos of our age is that everything that should be accepted has to be accepted. But yet, there's things that can't be accepted by people. So people will say, we should have freedom of expression, and you should accept everything within us, let's say. But then, the moment they come across something, let's say this particular person comes across something that they don't deem acceptable, maybe some sort of traditionalist view or whatever it may be, I don't know, they immediately say, well, that's not acceptable. And it's totally in contradistinction to their own philosophy. They've said that in the 21st century, everything should be accepted. We should have complete liberalism. We should be accepting of all varieties of experience. Well, that's brilliant in a way. In a way, it's not brilliant because it causes confusion, over-conceptualization, over-complexity, decadence, all these things I've just mentioned. Nihilism is a big one. Lack of meaning, all that sort of stuff. Causes all of that stuff. You can see it in the world. If you're intelligent enough, you can just pick it up quite easily. But let's say that's great. But then someone else comes along who has a particular view that their shadow doesn't like, the part of their shadow doesn't like. Then they come up and they say, "Oh no, I won't have that." But they've completely contradicted their own philosophy. Completely. It's absolutely ridiculous. You can't essentially place within your mouth a certain philosophy and then say that it is going to be, that it can't be that way. It has to be that it's a formulation of wholeness within you. It has to be that you accept that completely. It's the same as, let's say, someone who wants to be someone who accepts everything in the world. Let's say you want to be some spiritual master and you say, I accept everything. I accept the murderers. I accept all. You have to accept everything. Can you do that? And the fact is, you probably can't do that. There's probably things that get you riled up. There's probably things that, oh, actually, that was a bit shit. Oh, actually, the chambers in World War II where they bloody suffocated people and where they made bloody kids basically as thin as rakes. And where they did all sorts of stuff, where they were rubbing germs on people and making them sick and doing all this horrible stuff. Can you really accept that? And it's the same thing, just on a different level of experience. If you're going to say you have to accept all of what we stand for, or all of what, a variety of experience of expression, then you have to accept all of the other things as well, all of the other ways of expression that maybe actually you're not accepting of. And so it's absolutely ridiculous. It just, so many people have talked about this. There's bloody loads and loads of people, like Jungian psychiatrists, psychologists, philosophers. It's been on the news. God, it's everywhere. And I'm kind of, I suppose I'm quoting there a few different people actually. I'm kind of like picking up on what a few different people have said from it, and it was interesting when I've looked at certain things, certain kind of interviews, certain kind of speeches from people, when they've picked up on these things in a deep way like I have, and then it's like, oh yeah, shit, they are talking about the right thing. They are talking about the thing that is a phenomenon in the world at the moment, and it's absolutely ridiculous. But nonetheless, it is what it is, and that's what you have to deal with. So I will leave it there. I will see you in the next one because I have to go. I've got a little session, a university session in 10 minutes time. So I will see you in the next one, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If that was kind of a lot, that was kind of like individual attainment of your individuality, resting potential people after you're dead, over complexity, nihilism, decadence, overabundance of freedom of opinions and liberalism. I mean, it's incredible. You know, there was a lot in that. So anyway, I'll leave it there, and I will see you in the next one. So see you very soon, guys.